So when we are throwing it back to radioactive decay, because you guys have all learned this, right? We had learned that if I was solving for an unknown, right, I had to add up my top numbers and my bottom numbers to make sure that on each side of the arrow, right, they were equal to each other. And we had said that the numbers on the right and left had to equal each other because of the law of conservation of mass, right? And that just pretty much says that matter is neither created nor destroyed, it's just transferred. And there goes my alerts. Look at that. So, chemical reactions thus have to be balanced, meaning that the number of atoms on one side have to equal the other side, right? So my reactants and my products have to be equal. Okay, and we're going to look at that when we're balancing reactions, but before we start to balance reactions, okay, we now have to know how to count atoms before we can balance them, okay? So everything that we started to do with radioactive decay, we're going to now transfer that to the types of reactions that we have been looking at, okay? So we have to count atoms before we start to balance. And what that looks like, okay, is we have three kind of different scenarios. One, we have the subscripts, right? These are the small numbers that come after my element, okay? And these will be telling me, okay, the number of each element I have, right? So if I look here, my subscript for P is 6, right? So I have 6 phosphorus. I have how many chlorine? I'm going to have 3 chlorine, okay? So my subscript will tell me how many of each atom or each element I have, okay? But on top of subscripts, I also have coefficients, okay? And so those will come into play, right? If I have a big number in front, these are my coefficients, okay? So in the previous example, right, we said we had 6 and 3 based on our subscripts, okay? So that's what we're starting with. If I have a coefficient, or my big number, right, I have to multiply my entire molecule, right? So if I had 6 phosphorus, I now have 18, right? Because 6 times 3 is 18. If I have chlorine, I had 3 to begin with. 3 times 3 is 9. So in 3P6Cl3, I have 18 phosphorus, I have 9 chlorine, okay? So that's how we can use subscripts and we can use coefficients to help us determine our number of atoms, okay? If I have parentheses, right, meaning that I have a polyatomic ion, okay, my subscript that exists outside of the parentheses gets multiplied by everything within the parentheses. So let's start breaking this down first, right? The first thing we learned is I do my subscripts that are right next to each element, right? So beryllium, I have 1. Nitrogen, I have 1. Oxygen, I have 3, right? Once I determine the number, my subscript number, okay, I then look at my parentheses, right? So this number 2 here gets distributed to everything that is inside the parentheses, right? So that means that whatever my subscript for N is multiplied by 2. Whatever my subscript of O is gets multiplied by 2, so 3 times 2 is 6. And then I look at my coefficient, and that gets distributed out through everything, right? So 1 times 3 is 3, 2 times 3 is 6, 3 times 6 is 18. So that's how many of each atom I have, okay? With some practice here, let's try it out, right? I want to know how many atoms are of each. So I look at my subscripts first, then my parentheses, then my coefficient, right? So my subscript here of H is 2. My subscript of S is 1. My subscript of O is 4. Okay. I don't have any parentheses and I don't have any coefficients, so this is my final answer. Okay. Let's start with this. What's my subscript for Ca? It is 1. What is my subscript for O itself inside 1? Subscript for H is 1. I then have a parentheses with the subscript, so I now have to multiply everything that's inside the parentheses by that subscript. So I multiply each of those, my O and my H, by 2. And then I don't have a coefficient, so this is my final answer, right? Na, my subscript is 1. Cl is 1. I don't have a parentheses. I don't have a coefficient, so this is my final answer. Okay. We now do each individual one minus the parentheses, right? So N, yep, there it goes. This one comes right after it, right, is 1. The number that comes right after H is 3. The number that comes right after P is 1. The number that comes right after O is 4. I do have some parentheses, and that number outside of the parentheses is 3. That means that my N and my H have to be both multiplied by 3. So 1 times 3 is 3. 3 times 3 is 9. And I don't have any coefficients, so this is my final answer. Okay. H, my subscript, is 2. O is 1. I don't have any parentheses, so I don't have to multiply anything yet, but I have a coefficient, which means I have to multiply everything by 3. That was not 3, that's 6, and that's 3. So this is my final answer, okay? So when I have counting atoms, okay, I have rules. 1, can't even type. Apply the subscript number to each individual atom, right? So an example of that, right, is if I had H2O, right, subscript 2, hydrogen has, well, I can't even type, hydrogen has 2, okay? Second, if parentheses, okay, multiply the number of each element in the parentheses by the subscripts outside. Okay, meaning, right, if I had in parentheses OH subscript 2, right? Following the first thing, I would say, okay, I have an O of 1, I have an H of 1, and then I have a, okay, so I have an O of 1 and an H of 1 based on applying the subscript of each individual atom, right? And then I have my parentheses, so I'm going to multiply, right, my number of each by whatever my parentheses is, right? So O would now be 2, H would now be 2, okay? My third rule, if there is a coefficient, I multiply the numbers of each element by the coefficient. Right? So again, hypothetically, if I had, right, OH2, but this time I had 3 OH2s, right? I know I have O is 1, H is 1. I then saw my subscripts in my parentheses of 2, so I multiplied it by 2. And now I'm going to multiply everything that I have coming after the 3 by 3. So I would have 6 and 6. Okay. So I know that was a super quick video. I'm sorry that that went really fast, but the next video will help you understand it a little bit more.